Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a new patch, and per tradition, we get a new Anomaly Arbitration, and here are my thoughts on the stages, the balancing of it, the characters that are good for them, and some recommendations that could help you out in clearing it on your own. First of all, before we get into this video, and I can make this the first part of the video, I guess, Anomaly Arbitration is very much the most endgame of endgame you'll get in HSR. With the recent trends of HP and stage designs, it is no longer realistic to assume a free-to-play can fully 3-star the night stages unless you pull shield teams like Mono Elation and Mono Remembrance. It is simply too difficult to vault over it without either money or min-maxing pulls that makes the game really boring. So don't feel too bad if you can clear this, especially in this Anomaly Arbitration. There are some things that change, and there is a bit of a shift in the usual balancing of night stages relative to the king stages. But anyway, let's just talk about it in the video. Actually, let me play out this build showcase for a bit. I didn't dip any further than 8 cost, which is saying a bit of things compared to the other Anomaly Arbitrations where I didn't have to do that. But anyway, here comes the last character. Here's Sunday, E0S1, and let's get into the video now. We're back in format teams, and there is actually a hierarchy of which stages are the easiest and the hardest. But even the easiest stage of this are not for the faint of heart, just like last time. So let's talk about the easiest one, Night 1. Night 1 is almost identical to Night 1 from the last Anomaly Arbitration, except we aren't fighting the mechs that have insanely high quantum res anymore. Instead, we have this new enemy. The main thing this enemy does is that once you kill it, it will split itself into 2 enemies, then those 2 enemies also split again. At a total of 1 plus 2 plus 4 HP bars, 7 HP bars you have to clear, but do note that the HP bar gets smaller the more they split, so it's fine. Thankfully, their HP is pretty low, and they're not very threatening. They do joint AoE attacks that don't hit too hard, and they apply this debuff called Paramount Bliss, and if you don't clear that debuff in time, they can action delay you and take your SP. But you can simply counter it by using basic attack on your party members that get the Paramount Bliss debuff, so it really doesn't matter. Instead of the TB rescans that randomly CC or advance enemies, we now have the robot that can either punch you and CC you, or punch the enemy based on their max HP. Yes, there's no way to manipulate this, by the way. It is just purely RNG. You don't even guarantee it if you're Elation or something. And of course, we have the classic chicken and schoolgirls combo, because the devs hate sustainless but do not like updating old sustains to be good enough for some reason. The debuff is Confinement, which is not very impactful. So how bad is this stage? It's around a 12% HP increase from the last night stage, and at the very least the quantum lock is gone, so you can brute force much easier, but still the problems of this stage persist. The HP is much higher, and the elemental resist for this stage is still not very favorable. You can clear this with Mono Rem, but they are, kind of just always an exception. For more normal teams, even Herta with Tribi E1 feels pretty bad here. Anoxa feels bad since it's a multi-target fight in general that has individual HP bars. Mighty is Mighty, Saber is Saber, and yeah, the weakness types don't even fully shill Ash Veil. And in my experience, even Ash Veil feels kinda bad here due to how chunky they are, but it is his best stage, which is just very confusing. This is the easiest stage, by the way, and because of how dynamic the target count is and how the HP is distributed, you would want to bring units that can do enough AoE damage to clear out the tinier mobs, but also high single target damage, otherwise it falls apart. Firefly's blast profile in break is noticeably very incredible in this stage, Finon's meteor bounce and AoE, DOT's ability to focus on one target with Kafka's follow-up attack and AoE with Arcana stacks, Elation is Elation, and in general Tribi E1. This is also not very easy to sustainless unless you're Firefly or high invest, so you kinda have to take the HP increase on the chin. For what it's worth, the sustain check isn't as bad, but like in my Fu Xuan run here, you do want the presence of at least somewhat of a sustain, even if they are pretty weak. It's almost like they balanced this for a certain Nova Flare unit, but forgot her damage contributions are still not enough to make that big of a difference anyway. Even though this is the easiest, it's still notable that the HP is high enough that you will struggle to clear this without Eidolons or just using Elation. My DOT run had a pretty sweaty set of E1s totaling to 7 cost, and it was pretty easy due to the matchup and numbers. But even for break, they struggle without Eidolons too, since the stainless is so hard on this stage with 4 enemies, and the HP is just very high. Compared to the previous Night 1 stage, this no longer has the high quantum res mech, so it's less restrictive, but the HP spike is high enough anyway that it's still pretty restrictive. So they took away the elemental restriction and just added a higher damage check to do the same effect. I talked about this in my community post and I think that says it all. If you want to 6 cycle this night stage, it's very much easier than the last time because the enemies simply don't hit as hard that you don't get forced into that bad of a damage race, so you can kill them before they can kill you pretty easily. Now we move on to Night 2. Night 2 is a couple of old enemies. First wave is the Peacock and the anti-quantum mech from the last Anomaly Arbitration. I guess that's where they went. And the second wave is Sparksy. I've already explained their mechanics last Anom, so I won't have to do much here. The debuff is a new one, which reduces enemy damage taken, but it also reduces the amount of damage the enemies deal. If you want to sustainless any stage, this is the easiest one, but even then it's not that free. The Peacock is relatively harmless, while the robot is pretty dangerous. If you aren't using Break, you're gonna have to use some stronger sustain tools like CC effects from Welt or Anaxa, or just high enough damage to vault over it like Elation. The second wave, provided you have enough damage, is also fairly simple to sustainless, provided you go through the much more tight check on wave 1. Take note that the Quantum Mech is highly quantum res, so Archer is out of the equation, and the number of units that can survive the mech or disrupt it is a fairly short list anyway, to try and sustainless with it. Sparksy's out of bounds mechanic does force Gallagher out, and debuffers like Silverwolf base form are also at a disadvantage because of it. The last Night 2 stage was Pollux, so pretty much anything was going to be somewhat of an upgrade. The HP increase on this one is pretty rough though. This is the first time I hadn't cleared a night stage with premium E1 S1 Aglaya, which was frightening to behold. And the added robot on wave 1 is also just very nasty to force you out of using Quantum. The knights on this patch got an HP buff, and if you're trying to go against the weaknesses, you get severely punished by the amount of damage you have to do. So for some accounts like mine, this was almost as bad as the last Anomaly Arbitration, since I wasn't overkilling in damage except for my DOT team anyway, that a weakness disadvantage like this and an HP spike already kills most of my roster from 3-starring this. If I didn't have Firefly with her Nova Flare, it would be so over for a paid account. I don't know if I would take this over Pollux, because with Pollux, it's hard required a certain type of sustain, and if you didn't run that certain type of sustain, you were tanking your damage that you weren't 3-starring. In this case, most teams won't be able to sustainless this because of wave 1, and the HP is high enough that with type resistances, that even a strong sustain like Hysilens isn't a win by itself. At the very least, my free-to-play account that skipped Hysilens is doing much better, but not really enough to change into a 3-star because the HP spike kinda compensated for it. The best teams here are obviously Elation and Break. DOT can work, but you're pretty much required to use PT because of Sparksy's mechanics. Finon can do it too, but he's better off at Night 1. Welt and Anaxa do pretty well, but again the HP increase still means you want their premium setups, and in Welt's case his premium E4, otherwise it goes really badly. Evernight Brute Force as always works here too. And yeah, this is a pretty feast or famine fight, I would say. The mech in wave 1 really is the biggest gatekeeper, because if you have enough damage to push through the HP increase and type weakness to get out of it unscathed, you can do sustainless and get 3 stars pretty easily. But if you can't get past the gatekeeper without a sustain, then you're gonna have to buckle up with using a sustain and hope it's enough damage. Night 2 is harder than Night 1 for some accounts like mine. And the last night stage is Night 3, and this is the hardest. We have 2 new mechs here that ruin lives. One is highly imaginary res, and one is highly fire res. They have the same exact mechanics as the quantum res mech, but just swap every word that says quantum into imaginary or fire. Then the second wave is Flame Reaver. The last time Reaver showed up, he had 18% less HP and had depowered. This time, the stage has Taunting, which is actually pretty interesting in how this fight plays, since it will advance Reaver to counter the AB lock mechanic he has. But because of the mechs in Wave 1, the taunting debuff pretty much forces you to run a sustain just like the last time Reaver was here. And the mechs have 30% more HP than the Black Tide enemies from Wave 1 2 patches ago, and unfortunately don't activate their self-harm mechanics nearly as quickly even with countering. So the fact that depowered got taken away almost doesn't matter. You'll still want a sustain because the mechs hit hard, and your ult being up faster is compensated with 30% more HP on the enemy. Triby being stuck with 2 targets also means her energy may be unreliable anyway, and Mighty is resisted, I guess. The fight is actually so similar to Reaver's AA debut that the same exact teams that were good in the first one will be good here too. Except you need more investment now because you're fighting a near 20% HP increase. In my case, my Archer upgrade compared to last time was Ashvale Sig, and that did the job with a lot of resets for Sparkle energy. As for best teams and some notes that I have here, if I were to compare this to the last Anomaly Arbitration, there's a pretty decent amount of parallels of this stage over Lygus from the last Anom. Lygus was very punishing to even clear at a 1-star because of how heavy his nuke attack was when you don't do enough damage. Interference stacking over time in longer fights makes the gap between 6 cycling and 2 cycling a lot closer than on paper, which made it pretty hard to even clear. It was also fairly technical to time because of interference. In Reaver's case, you don't have interference, so RNG isn't as much of a concern, and Reaver doesn't nuke hard enough that a 6 cycle is much easier. But the HP is high enough to be bad, and it is still very technical, and the stage debuff itself is kind of interesting as a double-edged sword. Haunting eliminates the AB locked mechanics of Reaver, but if you don't do enough damage in the first place, it punishes you a lot more. The best teams for this stage interact with this debuff really nicely. Evernight and Castris teams have enough AoE attacks where Reaver will almost instantly always act, making their clear times very fast. Archer has so much control of Reaver because of his single target, and being able to speed up Reaver with his follow-up attacks makes him one of the best for this stage. Ashvale's constant mob killing while not being true AoE is actually fairly good here too, provided Wave 1 doesn't mess him up too bad. DOT is in a similar position. Even if the clones don't move, Kafka will be able to destroy them with enough investment. Aglaia is notably not as good since she hits so many times that Reaver may act before she's done sweeping the clones, and so on. There's been some pretty crazy play with taunting and Reaver, and managing it can get you a lot of results. So I actually really like this debuff, and it's way more fun to play over Lygus, but in practice the HP increase makes this fight still pretty bad. Again, Reaver is Feast or Famine, and if you haven't gotten a 20% upgrade from your last Reaver team, and you can't one-shot the clones, this is gonna be a very rude awakening. If you miss out on the threshold for your team to do this by even 1%, you're gonna struggle. So if you're struggling and you're trying to look at a run that was very easy that you're trying to replicate, if you find that the build is even 5% better than yours, chances are just getting that 5% better build might actually be all the difference to go from 2-star to 3-star. Even 0 cycling. The RNG of this stage isn't as bad unless you're doing really fine-tuned runs like what I did with Sparkle, Sunday, and Archer. Definitely use your strongest characters here, except if they're imaginary or fire because of Wave 1 blocking them out so hard with their element resist. And that's it for all of the night stages, and now we have the King stage, and I do actually have a lot to talk about this. This stage has broken a tradition of King stages by being surprisingly difficult to get a 3-star or even a 1-star with low investment. Wave 1 has the Penacony Gorillas that dies to DOT and shields, and there's a new enemy that does small lightning AoE damage when they die, which can be dispelled by elation damage. That's it, that's all the new enemy does. Wave 2 is the Joy Ascendant, which again splits itself to have effectively 7 HP bars, and Wave 3 is the new story boss that I have no idea what it's about. Yes, we finally have 3 waves of endgame that isn't pure fiction, and boy, this was a bad way to introduce it, huh? The gist of this Wave 3 boss is that it puts a debuff on you, and to lower its stacks you have to kill enemies or attack enemies. Pretty simple, and if the enemy attacks while this debuff is still there, it heals itself. The heal is pretty minimal though if you can clear the debuff consistently. The enemy constantly spawns trash mobs to make it easier for you too, and if you defeat them, they give you punchline, so I guess it shields Ela too. This enemy also has an uncleansable and unblockable 2-turn crowd control unless you have Silver Wolf passive or I guess Mighty, so that's pretty fun. Wow, this boss is so simple. Why is this much harder than the last King stages? Well, the boss has a lot of resistance. Normally, enemies have a native 20% res to the elements that they're not weak to, but this one has 40% res. Even if you're running Sparksy, who is fire, this actually is very debilitating to try and 3-star with compared to the last Anomaly Arbitration. Usual suspects like DOT and Mono Rem are also struggling and wants higher investment than usual. Black Swan being resisted when most of the team damage is usually from her is really bad, and Mono Rem's entire element spread is at a disadvantage. Firefly is resisted too, and Sustainless is pretty hard that she needs more cost than usual. Archer is doing pretty badly against this stage, to be honest. Anaxa is okay, I guess, still needs Irene. And Ashvale and Finon owe the devs so much favors that they are at a type disadvantage compared to their competition. The run databases in, this one specifically in the Herta archive have not been populated yet, but it's pretty interesting to see the cost jump for now. And this isn't just a 3-star problem, by the way, because the boss really doesn't have any self-sacrifice mechanics compared to the last Anom. So if last time you were scraping by just trying to get a 5 cycle on the King stage, the resistances of this stage might actually just block you from getting the dice altogether. I'm expecting a lot more viewers asking me to clear the King stage on their account more than usual, because right now the Night stages are easier to 1-star, meanwhile the King stage can get pretty demanding to clear to get the dice. At the very least, the debuffs for this King stage basically don't exist, and the selectable buffs are pretty good. But the type res and the HP increase still really hurt to clear that it more than makes up for it. This boss is one of the hardest King stages in a while. I would rank it below Aquila in terms of difficulty, which means it's at the top 3. And it's not because it's pretty technical or anything, it's just a massive sponge that tries to throw every roadblock for non-Ela teams at you. Overall, this is back in form of a more difficult King stage to squeeze a clear out of, and it's not really that interesting to even make up for it. So, is this the worst Anomaly Arbitration so far? It's actually quite interesting how they balance these night stages, and I can't exactly say outright that it's worse or better. The HP spike is the biggest culprit of this. In the previous Anomaly Arbitration, the HP was lower, but had a lot of shield mechanics tied into it, so much so that even if you could make the damage, the shield just stopped you from doing so. Like Pollux being the best example. Even if you have highly invested DPSs, you might just not have a sustain that can live through it, or you're forced to using a sustain that makes the damage worse. In this case, it's the opposite. There's not too much shilling, so if your roster just has high raw damage with E2s on good DPS, it's going to be easier. But if your roster isn't overly invested in damage in one team, the shill isn't strong enough for you to make low budget choices unless you're Elation. So it could be worse if your roster is more horizontal but not vertical. The stage debuffs are also interesting since they just don't matter as much, and instead of being outright negatives, in Night 2 and Night 3 specifically, they actually can work to your advantage. Honestly, I wish they would just give straight up buffs to shill an archetype instead of debuffs to negatively shill and push down the archetypes they aren't shilling. But this was a better step in the right direction, I think. And thank God interference doesn't exist and no depowered either. This is also much easier to 3-star or 6-star since the enemies hit hard enough to need a sustain, but not so hard that you'll die no matter what, which is what happened with Lygus from the last Anomaly Arbitration if you didn't clear him fast enough. And of course the lack of shilling has a fair bit to do with that too. In my experience with my paid account, 9-starring was still equally as difficult since the HP spike is pretty annoying, and only my break team got massively upgraded from the last patch. DOT was overkill from the start, and Archer barely scraped by. But at least I wasn't creatively stifled by anything else other than numbers because Pollux isn't here. So I think it's slightly better, but in my free-to-play accounts, it is kinda just worse. I don't think HP sponges are any better than shill machines, to be honest. We also have to talk about the balancing of the King stage. The King stage is surprisingly harder. For those people that are happy with only getting dice, this is a lot more funky than usual if you weren't using on element. And I said in the past that I don't like King stages being easier, but I can see why it's more beneficial for the player base, and this really shows why. I want king stages to not be such HP sponges and this uninteractive, but what can I do, I guess. Overall, the knight stages can be worse or better depending on the account, and the king stage is surprisingly much harder than usual. That's all. Again, just as a note from the beginning of the video, Anomaly Arbitration is completely optional. Unless you're chasing shield teams all the time, consistently 9-starring knights as a free-to-play isn't really realistic. So just take what you can get from this game mode to save your sanity. Hopefully this video was somewhat helpful, and I'll see you next time. Like, share, do the algorithm stuff, join my membership, and I'll see you later. Goodbye everyone, bye!